What would be when it's morning, the January 17th meeting, the result of any amendments, corrections, changes to minutes? None, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Oh, for a second? I say. All in favor, roll call, Mr. Malinowski. Aye. Ms. Jones-Johnson.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, minutes are approved. Next in your packet is the current expenditure ledger. As you'll see, we continue to have spent nothing this year. I'll talk later in the meeting on what we can do in terms of spending this year, as well as how we might want to address the budget, which we already did for next year. Moving on, we have, I guess, Jeff is better off with us. Thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us. We're first going to do the FAP amendments. So let's start with that. And Kate, we've gone through most of them. I think there are a few where we need to have a discussion with you because some of the language you suggested is different from what we were considering, and I wanted to go through why there may be that difference and which version we should go to. So let's start with the first paragraph. And I had actually added language that essentially says that the bylaw allows us to oversee the town administrator in the development and maintenance of personnel policies and regulations. And I chose that language trying to mirror what's in the town administrator bylaw. Because as we talked before, the town administrator bylaw has us doing things that are not covered by the SAP. So I was trying to make them more consistent. And I know that you were suggesting language that, and why don't you read the language that you were proposing?
Oh, okay. And Vanessa, in this packet, is it the language or should I pull up my own?
I think you want to look at your version.
Okay, hang on one second. I'm so sorry, you guys. Oh, good Lord. Here we go. And we're looking at the personnel bylaw administration plan. I'm sorry. Are we looking at Barry? I'm sorry, you're not in front of me. So are we looking at page 9 of the handout? And this is the salary administration plan, or? Are we in the salary administration plan?
Yes.
Oh, okay, hold on. I was pulling up the handbook. Got it. And I said in my proposals, I said establishes the authority to the personnel boards to create rules, regulations, and policies in furtherance of this bylaw. Is that what you're referring to, Barry? Am I not on?
I was trying to do with this language. There's nothing in the SAP that talks about our role with regard to personnel policies generally. We can adopt rules that are consistent with our duties that are set forth currently by the SAP, but there's nothing currently that gives us the authority to oversee what the town administrator does with regard to personnel policies, which is stated in the town administrator bylaw.
Right.
So I was just trying to guess the truth.
I mean, I view it like this. I view it that you guys create the policies and he implements and effectuates them. So, I mean, I view you as almost the legislative body on this policy side. Now, the way you've written it is, let me go back, to oversee the town administrator in the development and maintenance of personnel policies and regulations. I mean, so I view it that you all are developing the policies. Certainly he or she, if it's not Mark at some point, would make recommendations to you and suggestions based on what he or she is seeing in the marketplace. So in that sense, I guess that's appropriate, but really you all develop the policies in my mind. And that's how I wrote it. That's why I wrote it differently in my bylaw changes.
And that's where I run into a problem, because the town administrator bylaw says that he or she will develop the policy with the guidance and oversight of the personnel board.
Yeah.
I'm
And
just trying to make them consistent, that's all.
yeah, I mean, we can mirror that language. I think there's lack of clarity because there's not necessarily the smoothest transition between the town administrator bylaw and the personnel board bylaw. So but I'm happy with the way you wrote it. It's fine because in the end, it's sort of like 6 to 1, half dozen to the other. It's okay. You're not overseeing the town administrator, but rather overseeing the policies themselves. And if he creates them and presents them to you for approval, I'm fine with it.
Okay, because I can see things like, for example, the FMLA policy. We're not going to sit down and develop that policy. Mark's going to do that and present it to us going forward anyway. So, okay, we're fine with that. We'll leave that language. There's some notes in the document that I couldn't read on my screen, and I don't know whether they're even relevant to this one. And maybe Vanessa, you can clarify this. So on the definitions of class, there was some kind of note, and I don't know whether it's meaningful or just.
I think that may have been formatted.
Okay. And Kate, you wanted to do something with the definition of on-call compensation.
On-call compensation. Let's see. Let me go. I'm toggling back and forth between screens here. So, right. So, what I added was the employee has to be available and must maintain contact because I've had situations where people are receiving the on-call stipend and then not necessarily not necessarily available. So I want to make sure that there's some sticks along with the carrots.
Okay, so what exactly is the language you would add there?
So it says it will read in its entirety, on-call compensation refers to additional money paid to an employee who is required to be available, that's the new one, to work when the need requires and must maintain contact with the town to ensure availability, oftentimes an evening or weekend capacity.
Anybody have any questions about that, concerns? Okay. Moving on. I don't know that there are any other differences between our list and what you had done, Kate.
Yeah.
Unless you can think of any.
No, I think that was it that I'm seeing.
Okay. So why don't we, does anybody have any questions or concerns about the list of changes to the SAP or other changes they want to make?
I have a few.
Okay,
First is on Bates 20. Last year, we double asterisked the clinician because we wanted that to be effective immediately after town meeting. I think that double asterisk needs to come out now because it's now effective. But I would propose that we double asterisk the police dispatcher position because my understanding was that was a clerical error from last year.
well, we're going to fix that. That's number 12 on the list. We're going to move it back forward, it should be.
Yeah, I know, but I want it to be effective
Right after
when
town
town
meeting.
meeting.
Oh,
happens. I don't want those people to have to wait another 3 or 4 months to get that grade change. So what I'm proposing would be that grade change would become effective the Monday after town meeting for those part-time employees.
Okay, I don't have a problem with it. It's not going to impact their compensation. Because they're already, is it?
No, they're within that.
Right, so it's not going to impact their compensation.
Just in case the chief needs to hire someone,
No,
especially given the number of dispatchers. I know those are full-time positions at least now, but
okay,
let's just give the flexibility. There's no reason not to.
yep,
And then the other item that I don't know if we're gonna resolve today or not, that I'm just gonna put on the table is, based on the discussion in the last meeting, which I found incredibly difficult, is we need some mechanism to deal with, when personnel feel, they're not in the right classification. And we need a process to allow them to be heard, not guaranteeing that there's gonna be any change. I actually went to the personnel plan that I'm subject to in another community and found language that I would propose that we add in. And we can discuss it here today. We can discuss it another time. Kate can react to it, but I'm going to read what I propose and then we can discuss it. If an employee has facts that indicate that said employee's position is improperly classified, the employee may request through the department head that the personnel board review the classification of the position. Such request shall be submitted in writing containing a statement of justification. The employee shall have a right to file a grievance in accordance with, there's other provisions of this plan that allow, there's a grievance policy, if the department head does not submit the classification request for review by the personnel board. Now, in most instances, I would imagine our department heads would send it forward to the personnel board, so I'm less concerned about the latter language, but I am looking for some mechanism that the employees at least feel like if there's a situation that rises to level, because I don't, like when Chief Achilles was here last time, he was advocating very well, but we had no mechanism to deal with that in the moment. And I feel like if we had this language, I certainly would have felt more comfortable dealing with that situation in a different manner.
so how would that differ from what's already in the SAP in 17A?
Can you read it? Because I don't have that.
Sure.
part up.
It says all employees covered by the SAP shall have the right to request an appointment to confer with the personnel board on any matter of interest or concern to them that is covered by the SAP.
I don't think that's the same, is my interpretation. Yeah, they do, that's very broad. But this is actually, a department head would have the ability to advocate for a classification change in between our quadrennial review.
But he already has, I mean, he was here last week requesting that we could have granted it.
Yeah, but I don't think there was a formal process for us to actually grant it.
Well, there is in the SAP, the town administrator can come forward and make a recommendation to us to make a change during the year.
I guess think about the language and think about whether there's a way to achieve it, and I think I'd welcome feedback on it, but I think we need. I don't know if Mark has any views on that.
Yeah, I don't have anything different than what we proposed at this.
So you in favor of what I'm proposing and think it's incremental to what we have in the language, or you want to think about it?
Probably like to think about it a little bit.
All right, I mean, we could, what's our timing again?
The board is due to sign the warrant on February 27th.
Okay, so we'll have another meeting, so we can,
Yeah, and there's time if the board wanted to add in additional.
Yeah, I mean, I welcome Mark's opinion. I honestly didn't have time to send it to him, but I've done a lot. I just think it's another tool that even if it's potentially redundant with some of the other sections you're mentioning, Barry, I think the optics of it are obviously very clear and basically prescribe the methodology for department heads to go through a process.
okay. We'll talk about it next meeting, John.
I'm sorry, I don't agree with your proposal. We invest a lot of money in having a report that examines all these. We just went through that the last year. I don't remember anybody coming forward that wanted a change other than what we had at the last meeting. And I think that avenue worked out well.
I just think we learned a lot from that process last year, and I don't think it was perfect, and I don't think anyone on this board would probably say that. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And I just think 4 years is a long time. And we're in an interesting labor market. And I just, again, we need to acknowledge that the process could have been different last time. And I think when we look forward to doing this in 2 years, I'm sure we will learn from those lessons for any of us that are still sitting here, but we can agree to disagree too.
I just think that we're opening ourselves up to proposal after proposal. People that everybody would like to go up the step level.
We're not talking steps, we're talking grades.
It's not in the classification.
Well, let me ask about, how could we do that without, how could we change a grade without town meeting approval?
You wouldn't be able to. So, but for example, if we had this process in place this year, it may have caused changes for us to be proposing that for the March town meeting. Or, right, in the event there's a fall town meeting, that's another avenue. You have, no, I agree, there's no mechanism that I'm aware of to do it unilaterally, which I'm not proposing we do, but again, it takes time to go through that process. So I just, again, it's something I'm throwing out there as a potential tool, to not be in the situation we were in last week or last month.
Okay. And we'll talk about it next meeting. All
And
right,
Jason, if you could forward me that language just so I could, because it's hard for me to just hear things. I'd need a visual.
Send it to you now.
Oh, thank you.
okay, and Kate, just to be clear, then you're fine with all of the changes to the SAP that we're currently proposing? The ones in the-
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you for that. Let's move on to the handbook, just a few general comments. So what you have in the package, I'll describe it as rough. I didn't see it until last week, so John and I certainly have not had an opportunity to sit down with Kate or anyone and go over it, although I know Kate has reviewed them. And in terms of format, in the final version, all the documents will be formatted, so they'll look the same, unlike what we have now. One general point I would make is I would like to see, there are several policies that apply to portions of the handbook, and I would like to see in the handbook, in that portion, a reference to the policy. So that people know there's an actual policy on that, and we could hyperlink it so they can go, right, so they can go directly to the policy. I think the smoking regulations are in there twice, clear that up. We have an alcohol and drug policy and also a drug-free workplace policy. Shouldn't there only be one policy on that, or do we need both, Kate?
So, and just to let the board know, so the handbook is really close to done besides some formatting issues and checking for duplications and such. And I agree with you. I think it's good to have the, hyperlink to the actual policies. In the meantime, I also agree with you, Barry, on the alcohol and drug policy. So you guys had a very kind of antiquated policy, and Vanessa and I, as late as last week, were working on some of these outdated policies. So drug and alcohol, we had, I think we had a new discrimination policy, right, Vanessa? We had, say it again.
Policy.
I'm sorry.
Corey.
Oh, Corey. Yes, Corey. So we're in the process of updating those policies and replacing them. Because to your point, Barry, it used to just be alcohol, and now we're dealing with other sort of things, and we're trying to make them 2024 policies. So we'll have them for sure by next week, and then depending upon the policy, it may require the approval of other boards too. So what we did do is we put a line in the cover letter to the handbook, which says, okay, the policies become effective upon the ladder of approval of the personnel board or the other board that may be required. So yes, I think it should be linked, but I think the policies need to be reviewed prior to submitting them to you for your review.
So what the board has is a very rough, certainly not in final shape, the policies. I wanted to get them to you because obviously there's a lot of material, and I didn't want you to feel that you only had a very short time to review them, recognizing that most of them at the end of the day, we're going to rely on advice of counsel as to the propriety of the policy. So I'm not going to ask anyone to make any decisions with regard to the policies today, but I wanted to get them in front of you. Any other questions or comments on any of the policies that you have for Kate now?
I mean, my overarching comment on policies, they all look inconsistent, right? I realize some are like IT policies, so they're done on IT, right? And I just think similar to everything we're doing, and I realize there's still formatting that needs to be done. I think someone just needs to take a fresh look at all of them. Are they still in line legally with what should be done? And then in addition to that, are there edits because of just the age of the policy, right? Like when a smoking policy was put in place a long time ago, obviously things have changed, right? Just like everything else. So I just think I need some assurances that the right eyes have been on it for each of the subspecialties. And that when we put this out, we're actually putting out something that's up to date as opposed to just attaching policy. And again, if we need other boards to adopt them, so be it, depending on the nature of the policy.
No, good point, and it reminds me of a point. So in going through these, I see a number of policies that say approved by the select board, and I'm somewhat confused by the role of the select board in this process. So, and again, I have not attempted to study the bylaws on this, and Kate, I don't expect you to be prepared on this because I didn't alert you to it. Just sort of dawned on me as I was going through these. It's not clear to me what role the select board has in the adoption or approval of personnel policies.
Well, can I jump in, Barry? I think
Sure.
just keep it in mind that there's the overarching principle of, for example, the select board has care, custody, and control of facilities. So like one of the things I'm thinking is, yeah, sure, you don't want your employees to be smoking on town property, but the select board is really the one who's in charge of property. Okay, so you guys are in charge of creating personnel policies. So if it were me, I would have both bodies adopt that because it pertains to how employees are behaving and conducting themselves on town property. But the board has control of the property. So there are all those pushing and pulling of authorities going on when you're dealing with these types of policies. Similarly, you're talking about conduct of employees when they're working on their computers and how they're interacting with customers, et cetera, digitally. But the board is actually the one who has care, custody, and control of the pieces of equipment too. So I think those are some of the things that I'm thinking that jump out in my head as being ones that require different approval on top of yours. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Barry.
No. And I certainly agree with you on that. I remember a situation during COVID, and I remember my predecessor being quite upset about the fact that the select board adopted a work from home policy without any consultation with this board, and we were advised after the fact that this policy was in place. And I didn't fully understand her point at the time, but I think she was absolutely correct that that was a policy that should have been adopted by the personnel board. But in any event, I think we need to clarify just going forward so the respective bodies understand their respective roles, and that with regard to pure personnel policies, FMLA, for example, or something along those lines, those are still, now to the extent, obviously, the town administrator works for the select board, there's that. But in terms of the development and adoption of purely personnel policies, the select board really should be advised, but doesn't have a role in that. Mm-hmm. Am I overstating that?
No, I think that's true when it comes to pure personnel policies. I would agree that authority is vested in you.
Okay. Just want to be clear on that. Other comments about the personnel policies that were in the packet? Again, you'll see these again in a more refined and hopefully close to, if not final form. So you'll have another shot at this, but just wanted to get it because there's a lot to absorb, and I just wanted to introduce everyone to that. Any other discussion on that? Seeing none, I don't think we have anything else for Kate. Kate, thank you very much for your time, as always.
Thank you so much for having me, you guys, and I appreciate all your input and your hard work on this as well. It's not lost on me how much you guys are thinking about this, and I think it's really wonderful.
Said it. Have a
All right.
good day.
Bye now.
All right, we're gonna jump ahead, in the agenda to item 5A12, the proposed new position in the DPW. There he is. Why don't you come up and have a seat? Good
Good morning.
morning, welcome,
Thank you.
particularly welcome from the personnel board.
Appreciate that. Bill Cundiff, DPW Superintendent. So some of you I know are familiar with the request that I put forth, but basically, I guess the town of Southborough for years has had a role for a town engineer in the DPW. And more recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the position was basically slowly eliminated. And in the more recent past, with the transition of the director to myself, and the construction activity that we've had going on, I have identified a distinct need and a cost savings for the town by having this position. The reason that we would save money is currently we have no one that's qualified to oversee these construction projects. We could certainly hire an outside consultant, but with that, and I've done this in the past, with that, you lose continuity from project to project. Generally, the consultant will furnish an employee that is at a engineering training level that's learning, that may not be quite experienced. And I've had consultants put people on construction projects that just out and out are not qualified for that type of work. So what I'm suggesting is that we have, and I'm going to downgrade this. I know we talked about town engineer, but what I envision is more of an engineering tech or an engineering aide for the department. I'm myself a professional engineer, so if there's any engineering level related work, I could certainly do that. They would do the legwork out in the field, and that's what I envision. So the primary premise of this position is to have a person that will monitor and oversee and make sure we're getting what we're paying for in the field during construction. And I referred in the memo I provided, I referred to the more recent example of the paving program we recently completed. We had contracts for 1.75 million. And just looking at one aspect of paving, compaction, if you fail to achieve, the desired compaction, if you go, typically a compaction rate is going to be 93 to 95% for the paving. For every 1% that's below that, you end up losing 10 years of life in that paving. So in an economic perspective, that on the current contracts, we're talking about 175,000 for just last year's paving projects. So the position I'm seeking is at a salary of 80,000. There's other aspects that this position will provide. That example is simply intended to illustrate the order of magnitude of savings that we could realize here in the town. And we want to make sure that we're getting the product that we're specifying. So, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's low-hanging fruit for the town to, to act on this opportunity. So in addition to that one scenario, this person would also bring to the table, some day-to-day activities that I'm currently doing, notification requirements. I know communication on construction projects has been a problem in the past, and we want to make sure that, we have good communication. That person would step up and make sure that when projects are going on, all the residents are communicated with, and we have an opportunity to take their input during the design phase. I also envision this person being instrumental in establishing a GIS database on our infrastructure so that we can know what we have and the condition of what we have. Currently, I'm in the process of seeking a grant for a pipe camera so we can inspect our drainage pipes. This person could assist with overseeing that program. So basically, there's going to be no shortage of work for this person. And I think, as I mentioned, just one example I gave, I think more than pays for the position. So I think it's an opportunity for the town.
Thank you. So this has not, the job description has not yet been approved by select board, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And typically, typically I wouldn't want the personnel board to be acting on a job description that the appointing authority had not already approved. We have a timing issue here, recognized, because we have to get this in the warrant, and obviously the warrant has to be done. So in this case, would I be open to putting aside the merits, and we can get to the merits of it, is if we were to decide we were in favor of this, I would be inclined to approve it at this meeting so that we can classify it and vote on the classification at the next meeting. And if in the event that the select board had not approved the job description, in the interim, we would just withdraw our prior approval so that we don't hold things up and we can move it forward. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. John?
We always had a town engineer. I assume it must have been dropped for financial consideration.
Someone,
It was in 3 years ago that the position was no longer funded, and we were using it in engineering further, more often.
Oh,
So that's when the position was taken out of it.
because I remember in my previous tenure on the personnel board, I headed up job description for the town engineer. We went ahead
At that time.
and we got a town engineer. I'm sorry, I never realized we lost.
I'm sorry too.
other questions, John?
I mean, I don't think we weigh in on the merits of the position, although Phil's made a compelling case and I'm very supportive of your position. I don't think it's our job to weigh in on whether it's an appropriate position or not. I mean, that's for town meeting, and obviously select board and advisory make their recommendation. On the position itself, few questions. One, Mark, can you help Bill get this into our template? Because
Yeah,
we're gonna be.
I'm not
we're
sure
gonna be
why it
reviewing-
wasn't.
We're gonna be reviewing all these like 6 or 7 job descriptions, and then we've got, so that's easy, lower hanging fruit. Bill, my question was, before you gave your opening, I was very focused on the education and how you're focused on an associates, which then impacts our eventual classification of the position. Are you sure, like, because you talked about maybe, I was going for an associate's, not a bachelor's, and you obviously spoke to the expertise that you have as superintendent. Are you sure that this is the right approach and this is the right market for a municipality? Or is there a potential that you want to have optionality, like a true PE versus a non-PE, just in case, I don't know what the market's.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to create optionality, but also make sure that when we come back and classify this, that wherever it's gonna land on our salary scale actually is gonna allow you to attract a candidate, especially given the field you're looking to attract.
The concern I have with that approach, and I've thought about that, and that's why I submitted it initially as a town engineer, but now I'm kind of backing it down to an engineering aid, is it's a very competitive market out there. And when you have a PE that's going to be out doing, road construction inspection, that's great for year 1, year 2. They'd likely be moving on, I envision, after that. what I'm trying to do is foster a good environment for a career for somebody. So I think having an engineering aid approach is probably a better approach. We can train them, have a little control over what they do and how they implement it. And hopefully it'll be a local person. So, you know, all of those things will work out. I'm optimistic that this is the better approach at this point.
I'll just go on the record as saying, I think I trust your judgment on this, but I wouldn't be opposed to having two positions in front of us. I know you're only gonna fill one, but having two classifications in the personnel plan. So you don't have to do this again.
Right.
And as you're going through the hiring process, you can decide potentially where they slot based on what expertise they bring to the table, because you have no other projects in front of you, as we all know, right? So I realize a lot of it's paving, but I think just given what we've seen in this town over the past couple of years, I mean, you have a lot in front of you. So I don't want to short sell if you do get the right candidate that happens to be, we're going to have limitations on what we can do if you don't have potentially two positions set up. Again, only fill one,
Sure.
but just give us some thought.
Right.
Is my sense. My only other question was in terms of project oversight, are there any certifications that you're considering that they should have from a municipal standpoint? You know, not necessarily owner's project manager type certifications, but anything, because again, that goes to the.
That's way up here. Yeah. No, I envision they have to have basic knowledge of engineering, civil engineering technology. So even an associate's degree would be appropriate for this.
Okay. I have nothing else and I'm ready to support the job descriptions presented.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, seeing that, when do you anticipate going to select board with this?
Well, I'll talk to Mark and Vanessa about it, but as soon as possible.
Soon,
Yep.
probably January 30th or February 6th.
Okay. Because we can't grade it until, you know, if select board is gonna make changes to it, we would have to know that in order to grade it, so.
Understood.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the job description that's in the packet for the sort of right, engineer technician / engineer aide in the Department of Public Works?
I'll move to approve the job description with the understanding that the format will be brought current with all other town jobs.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Thorburn. And Ms. Johnson.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. It is approved on that basis.
Thank you.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And we will be seeing you again at our next meeting, which will be talking grading the position.
And then obviously the select board has changes we're going to revote.
Yes,
Sounds good. Thank you.
okay. Moving back to the agenda, item 4, employee training tuition reimbursement. And let me say a few things about budget before we get into the meat of this. So I talked to town accountant about this because we had discussed at the last meeting about our ability to move funds around. And so I asked her a couple of things. One is in terms of the current budget, current fiscal year, we can move funds from tuition reimbursement, and I might put in the record that we had no request for tuition reimbursement for this year. We can move funds from tuition reimbursement for another purpose, such as employee development. This fiscal year, I would simply have to send a memo to select board advising them that we were doing that. Going forward, what we could do to give ourselves more flexibility, instead of putting money in two pots, the tuition reimbursement and employee development pot, we could put all of the money in the employee development pot and still use, if we had a request, we could still use the funds for tuition reimbursement. So in a year like this year, we know by the end of, in this case, we knew by the end of 2023 that we had no use for the tuition reimbursement funds. We could use that for employee training. So that's a mechanism we might consider going forward. Why limit ourselves? It's not limiting ourselves because we can deal with it through a memo, but give ourselves more flexibility and just put it all in employee development. At the end of the day, tuition reimbursement is a form of employee development. So anyway, I throw that out there for our consideration in terms of what people want to do. If we want to change it going forward, we just revote our budget and put it all in employee development, but it's up to what the board wants to do on that.
I have a few thoughts on that. One, do we know why this is at least 2 or 3 years in a row now with no tuition reimbursement? And I want to make sure that there's not something flawed with our process or something like why aren't those funds being used? Because at least when I joined personnel board, there used to basically be far more requests than funds that were available. So now we've kind of flipped. And it also reinforced my point on timing, right? So we have some very rigid cutoffs.
Yes.
What I would like to see us do is actually, warrant's still open, right, for town meeting?
Yes.
I think we should move this to a special article moving forward and do a one-time funding of it upfront. So what a special article does is it allows it to carry year by year. So for example, if you have 2 employees in a fiscal year that really have compelling items, you know, we've basically been turning this money back, which it's completely counter to the reason it's there. We can't control when these people enroll in degree programs or whatever type of programs they're enrolling. And we obviously have rigid requirements around grades and all that, which I think is great. This would create ultimate flexibility to make sure the money's actually getting used there, but not have to operate in this fiscal year construct. Because I get it, life gets in the way and timing does not always line up. And I think we need to continue to encourage this sort of using these funds. So I would propose we take it out of our budget, make it a special article, and I realize the budget landscape is quite tight, but I would, consider whether it should be more than the amount that's there, just to do an initial seeding of the article. I don't think $5,000 extra, for example, like if we made this move from 5 to 10 would cripple anything, especially, given the free cash situation of the town. And if we commit to not using these particular funds, we're basically funding it ourselves with the current years, it's gonna drop free cash flow. There's some accounting has to go on in there, but that's where I'd like to go with this.
So when you refer to an article, do you mean for all employees in that case, or still SAP employees?
I'm not familiar with the provision. I would make it. It's a good question. I'm not familiar with provisions of the union contract, so I have to leave those off the side. But you're talking about a department head that's under contract as an example.
That or a union employee who might be looking for some leadership development, training or academic program.
I can't answer to the union because I think there's special provisions in each of the
There are
contracts.
some, yes.
So leave that off to the side for a second. My intent was, this is always for personnel board employees.
It has.
That's where I would continue to focus this article and limit it. I think if a department head, right, we have what, 5-ish on contract. They're all appointed by boards that have significant budgets. I think if that board is dictating that person's development, right, we're talking about chiefs, town administrator, DPW superintendent, public health, right, like they have mechanisms within their budgets, I think, to deal with this. My focus is on the employees that are covered by the personnel plan. I'm okay broadening it, but I think there should be buckets, right? So that if you really think something should be done for the union, that's gotta come from outside the personnel board. But my goal would be to at least transfer 5, my recommendation would be 10, to a special article. And then every year revisit whether it needs to be replenished, or if no one is still taking advantage of it. Then, you know, it just carries and there's no budgetary allocation to it. And it's sitting there for when the employees want to use it. And it will create a lot of less rigidity to our process, because I imagine that's causing. I gotta imagine no one's just sitting there not pursuing extra education.
Let me respond to both points. So, and I guess it was before you were on the board, Betsy asked for a look back. We actually had a chart that went back about 10 or 15 years to show tuition reimbursement, and it was exactly as it has been. There are several years in a row where there was none. Then there'd be a year where there's 3,000, then there's 3 more years where there's none. So I don't think what's happened recently is different from what's always happened with tuition reimbursement here. On the second point, it seems to me we're making this more difficult than it has to be. If we just put all of the money in one pocket, if we have the need to use more in a year for tuition reimbursement, we have it to use. We don't have the $5,000 cap anymore. If we need to spend 7 or 8 on tuition reimbursement, and we think that's what we should do, we have the freedom to do it. And you know, I'm trying to remember, I think there was one year where there was a request, help me, Vanessa, where we've used all the funds already. Did that happen once?
Like this one.
Yeah,
It really ebbs and flows, and I think one of the things that, Ms. Jones Johnson and I have been talking about relative to community is really taking another look at that particular policy, because it still is very much structured on fall and spring semesters and not, you know, online programs or enrolling deadlines.
well, and it also, and we've talked about this, it requires essentially a college course. There has to be a grade involved, and we want to, but that's sort of a separate issue. But so it seems to me we can address the flexibility in a simpler way.
I'm thinking my way is actually far simpler, because it allows you to carry year to year. You're still, if you bucket yours together, which I think is better than what we have now. So I think progress, but I'm trying to take it a step further, because we are boxed in to a fiscal year, right? So candidly, I've been underwhelmed by the training opportunities that have been brought before personnel board last couple of years. So that money has also gone unspent, right? So then you're just turning this money back and you're not developing the employees. I think we need to separate it. And I think based on what I've seen on goals of other boards, they want to invest in the employees. We're not gonna have trouble getting the funding for this, even in a difficult budget year, because it's a small dollar investment that has potential to make a meaningful impact on a number of employees. So I stand by my proposal that I think we need a special article, and I think Mark needs to weigh in on this too. But I think we need a special article solely related to tuition reimbursement. And I think we go back to the tuition reimbursement policy altogether at a future meeting for personnel board employees. And then we bucket everything else, whether it be external contracts and wellness and employee development that are more broader sessions, into one line item in our budget going forward.
Mark, do you want to,
So the one thing I'll add, and I know we've had conversations about this before, is whether we want to broaden this from simply tuition reimbursement to cover, you know, certificates, to cover that type of training as well, and simply not degrees. Because I think that, you know, a lot of our employees, you know, have specialized training and everything that have to be done to maintain certification. So if we're gonna look to do something like this, do it all. Look to expand that, so that's my thought. I don't disagree with the approach. So I think that approach, something might work, but let's expand the use of it, which I think would stop seeing the dip of it doesn't get used for 3 or 4 years, And then 2 or 3 people use it, and, you know, that type of thing. I think you'll see more moves.
Other comments?
There is one. There's one, I don't think I've got a lot of care.
Oh, sure.
I did just want to quickly comment. I guess, first of all, I think that, I want to separate intent from process. So I think the intent is to ensure that we can provide, development and opportunities for people that want to go back to school to be able to support that. And I think that intent is definitely there. And I don't want that to get diminished by sort of the process and structure piece. I think we have a lot of moving parts. And so one of the pieces that, as I'm jotting down notes from the meeting, is that I'm always thinking through, like, what is the real issue we're trying to solve here? And sometimes I'm not sure that we're clear about what that real issue is. And then we go down a path of changing a process. So I like the idea of bucketing it all together. I like the idea of making sure we take a look at the tuition reimbursement policy to see if we can broaden it and make it more relevant to what we think people need to continue to advance in their careers here with us. And I like the idea of being able to think through a way that we can have some continuous funding from year over year. But I feel like we need to just really hone in on what are the issues we're trying to address, and then come back with here's the steps we need to take. I think at the end of the day, we're starting at looking very differently at the way that we address learning and development for the town. And Vanessa has outlined, and Mark have outlined, a really different path that I think will serve us very well. But I do want us to make sure that as we're talking through this, that we don't sort of imply that we don't have the right intent of supporting our employees from a learning and development standpoint. I think we just now are at a place where we have opportunity to look at process a little bit differently and how we continue and sustain funding over time.
Yeah, and I think employees should see that we're actually putting more money than we have in the past into this. And I think we're thinking about it in a more holistic way than we have in the past. In the past, it was, okay, we need to spend money. Anybody got any ideas? And now we're trying to think about how are we approaching this from an overall perspective, and what kind of programs can we put together that will help our employees both broaden themselves and help them advance through their careers. I think hopefully people should see that, but you're right, it gets to what are we trying to accomplish and what's the right process for getting there. And you know, we don't have to make a decision on this today, but we certainly have to make a decision on it by our next meeting, because the numbers are going to not change from a budget perspective. Well, they would change.
Depending on what number you put out there.
Yeah,
They could.
I mean, our budget number would, if we go, your route would go down. But
The overall,
the overall effect on the.
as long as it's 5-5.
Right. Right. But you know, even if it's 10, I can't imagine extra $5,000 is going to wreak havoc with the town budget.
Well, especially if we commit, if we know that at least our current process, which we're acknowledging needs to change, that we don't have any reimbursements for this year, we're basically committing unless we bucket them, right? Like the question is, are we gonna commit to returning that 5K this year or not? Or are we gonna, right? And I realize that's part of maybe the discussion we're gonna have on some of the trainings. Taylor had her hand up at some point.
Yeah.
So let's let Taylor go, and I have maybe a motion to move that part along.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
For those of you who don't know me, Taylor West, I work for the health department. Thanks for bringing this topic. I don't know hopefully you're looking for employee opinions, but this is something that I have been looking at and struggling with because, and I think all these points have been brought up already, but the timeline in which you can apply is very stringent. And I looked into applying for the money last year and I was kind of out of the window. So I didn't apply for it. And then the second thing is the amount of money. The reason also why I chose not to apply for it is because if you get all the money, which is not guaranteed, right, it doesn't pay for even one course. So I appreciate the talk about increasing it, and it would definitely motivate me to apply for it. I would love to take classes. Much like everyone else, it's a big commitment with money, and I'm excited that you're having this discussion. And I would also love to hear what other employees think, because I know there has been some other employees who have been looking at this too. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about this, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, yeah, John.
Is the idea right that, if we didn't spend that $5,000 for tuition reimbursement, it could be applied to one of the other items in our budget?
Correct. We could use it for employee development this year if we feel the need to do that.
And if we were to come up with, employee development that costs more than what we budgeted for, we could ask for, additional funds.
We could, I mean, we have quite a bit of money there.
Yeah, I don't think
I'm not anticipating we're gonna get to that.
No, that would be the procedure. Any department needed, exceeded its budget, they needed a transfer. You could do that, right?
Theoretically, yes, that's correct.
It's done all the time.
Not a good year to do that. I wouldn't be supportive of that. Not a good year. There's a lot of other bigger issues that, I mean, I think we gotta focus on spending what we have first. Let's start there.
I want to explore the avenues here.
That's what I think we're getting to, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think we have theoretically $12,000 to spend this fiscal year on training. I can't imagine.
Yeah, 5 months left.
Yeah, that we're gonna spend $12,000.
Forget about the amount of money.
Yeah,
I'm saying is, if the situation arose that we wanted to spend more money on employee development, we have an avenue that we could request. We could request it, we might not get it, but we could request.
Yeah,
The avenue was there.
it's always an add. So Barry, I'd like to make a motion that, the board revisit the tuition reimbursement policy and that we submit a placeholder article for the town meeting warrant to create a tuition reimbursement, fund.
yeah, I don't have a problem. I want to give it more thought, but I don't have a problem with, yeah.
So we just need to,
Yeah. Any further discussion about that? Well, is there a second on the motion? I'll second it. Any further
Sorry,
discussion?
I'll second it. I think we definitely have to look at our policy again. We have to broaden it. And Vanessa, or Mark, do you have any data from employees in terms of what some of the barriers might be? I mean, we've heard from one, but I'm just wondering if we have any data that can be helpful as we look at the policy and think about how to make it more, compelling for people to take advantage of.
Not most recently, but we can survey the employees again and do that. At the same time simultaneously reviewing and bringing back at the next meeting edits to the tuition reimbursement policy to make it much more
Just
amenable.
curious.
I mean, Michelle, I don't want to volunteer you, but you obviously have the expertise in this area. Does it make sense that if employees are listening to this, that they reach out to you? But I just find one-on-one conversations also really helpful. To try to figure out where to go as opposed to a survey, you know, people click a few boxes and sometimes aren't as honest. So are you okay with us volunteering, to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak. Yes, I'm absolutely happy to do that. But I also am very data driven. And so I want to make sure that we have enough data to support any decisions that we're making. But absolutely would love to hear about, you know, what employees may feel might be something that may be roadblocks, opportunities for us to think differently about the policy, particularly as it relates to professional certifications, and if that's relevant for consideration as we think through what we need to do to ensure that people have the right timing and the right, you know, motivation for pursuing this. We may find that we get a lot more people that now apply that we then don't have funding for, but
That is something that's come up more often in our most recent survey.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the types of certification programs and leadership development, you know, seminars that folks are looking to go to, and, you know, a lot of that stuff is just not budgeted in individual department budgets. So in these
Right.
where there is no tuition reimbursement, you know, we're really looking for support to get folks to those kinds of programs. In fact, is another item.
Right. I mean, I think the other thing that would be interesting to look at is demographics. I mean, if we have a more, you know, people with longer tenure, then, you know, there's probably more likelihood that many will not pursue a more like a formal 4-year degree necessarily, but would certainly be interested in thinking about how they can enhance and build their skills in their roles. So I think we have a lot of opportunity here. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion made and seconded. All in favor, Mr. Thorburn? On Jason's motion.
Yes. Aye.
Mr. Malinowski, Ms. Jones Johnson,
Aye.
chair votes aye. That is approved. All right, let's move on to the actual proposals, I'll use that term, for training. And I know that Michelle, you've met with Vanessa and maybe Mark, and while I know the document that's in your packet, you didn't draft, I know you had some role in the development of that, so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So at page 127 in the packet, we have sort of an outline of proposed training for the current fiscal year. Vanessa, do you want to go through?
Sure. So this came up as a result of conversations with Ms. Jones Johnson that, you know, Mark and I had over the past few weeks from your last meeting. And we really wanted to go back based on feedback and look at how to put a plan in. As was noted earlier, we're often in the second half of the year looking for, you know, what topic makes sense, who can we get to come and do that. So we really wanted to have a whole program plan for the rest of this year and into next year. So with Ms. Johnston's advice, this is how we structured it by the various different categories and what topics make sense under those categories. So you'll notice these are just ideas right now. There are no cost estimates or suggested speakers. Based on the feedback from the board, you know, and the employees, I can certainly turn that around for your next meeting. Now, let Michelle add any of the feedback she'd like to.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is I do consider this sort of a draft. Mark and Vanessa worked really hard on this. There are a couple of things that I think we definitely want to tweak, and then thinking about, you know, one of the notes that I sent to Vanessa really late yesterday was around pulling out the more mandatory mandatory types of training so that that's a different category. So things like the active shooter and some of the other trainings that we have in our handbook that we've outlined as mandatory training, we certainly want to categorize those. But then we also want to make sure we're clear about the audience, we're clear about the sort of learning objectives for each of these. Some of the categories will tweak the names a little bit more. And then thinking about cost and then delivery mechanism, are things going to be on like in person? Are there remote opportunities? So what I envision coming back with is more of a training matrix for the committee to be able to review and take a look at and provide feedback on. And then thinking about sort of, this other piece around reimbursement and what employees may or may not be thinking would be important in terms of their learning opportunities with the town. So more to come on that as well.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Is there further discussion on the sort of that document and the general approach to training before we move on to specific requests?
Not comment on the specific requests, but
Okay,
thank you for them, for everyone taking the time. This is much better than I think what we had been working with in the past.
thank you, and we'll look forward to hearing more at the next meeting. All right,
Can I just, sorry, I didn't realize you're moving fully on behind the topic. Some of these I think we can take care of for free. So
Yes.
I'll work with some, if like, I think just go do them, right? You don't need the person on board to weigh in. It's unfortunate to do like the Alice training, for example.
I know.
Unfortunately, we have to even think about stuff like that, but I think that stuff we can work with our police, fire departments.
From Youth and Family Services, actually, that suggestion, it was a great idea. It's been a couple of years since we did that. And, we've had, a number of people turn over, in this building and other buildings. So I think it's unfortunately time to do it again.
Yeah, okay. When are we gonna take action on this?
well, I think we need some more specific.
So should we give direction of kind of what we want to see a quote and a program
I
outline
would
for?
appreciate that.
Because, right, 'cause it's
So
gonna
we can
take you a
adjust
month,
it
right,
for the
okay.
next meeting.
So I'm very focused on, just because, was there a specific reason, like, you put in the parentheticals, like 54%, 63%?
It was just to show you. from
But
the
like,
list.
did any of these others have that level of support?
No.
So
I just wanted to
My
put that
eye
out.
went right to the employee wellness section.
Yeah.
I think it's very different than what we've done before, and I think we should start there. Because I think that benefits everyone, right? And I'm looking beyond even the SAP employees. And I think it's something you can do on a regular, it's not like a one and done, like if you show up for these 2 hours, you
Right.
check the box for your employees, like, these are things that I think you could create sustainable programs out of during the year, so I would strongly support looking at those. But then I also think, I'm also very focused on the skills-based training. Thing on the record on my view on Excel these days, and I don't support anything on Excel. I think that's not probably where we're spending our money, but the social media piece, there's a ton of pros to that. There's also a ton of cons to, and I would want the select board, MTC, town administrator to look at the social media policy first before we offer something. Like who's allowed to post, who's not, what training do they have on some of these things, right? Obviously, public safety does a lot of that. Obviously, you and your team do a lot of that, and each of these town boards and some of the other departments have their own pages as well, so I'm supportive of that, but it has to be in line with the policy.
Right.
And then I do like the OneDrive and just the version control. Brian and I can speak to a lot of that, just in terms of some of our other boards and committees, just version control of everything and having it all in the same spot. So I think that would benefit all employees. And then I do think the effective delegation one stood out to me under the organizational development. And I think that goes beyond department heads, and I know it says managers and supervisors. But I think if someone can understand, even if they're the one that are receiving the delegation, right? Like how, right, so if they also don't, they can manage an upward delegate, I think is
Right.
also part of this
There's a
equation.
lot of overlap.
Yeah, so, those are the ones that stood out to me that I would like to see. Formal kind of quotes, timing, who's involved, and then see where we land on a budget after that.
Okay, thank you.
Other
So
comments?
that would be part of the training metrics, that matrix that I talked about earlier, where we would outline all of those, including the timing. So great feedback on that, and we'll be able to bring that back to the committee for February, I would hope.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, Michelle, is timing. I know we're sitting here looking at snow out the window, but by the time some of these get trained, scheduled, it's gonna be May and June, and that is our peak vacation month for town employees.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there, especially the things that are freer, those things that are focused on wellness, they may be able to move forward quickly. And the other pieces we may have to bring back and,
Yeah.
phase out and really sort of outline from a cost perspective, how we're going to approach that.
Right, you may have specific programs you're recommending at the next meeting that we can approve and get started. So, okay,
But is
Everybody-
the active shooter training something we need to move forward with pretty quickly, it sounds like?
I
Vanessa?
think there's so much to talk to Chief Newell. and
Yeah,
go
we'll
from
be
there.
working with the public safety.
Okay.
chief for,
Okay, very good. All right.
John,
I would think that we would focus on employee wellness. Especially where we have requests for that at a better than 50%. Request. If we don't have well employees, we don't have any progress.
and we have done some training in the past, a couple of years ago, I can't remember his name.
John Bolton.
Yes, yeah. So anyway, but yeah, good thoughts, and we will definitely move forward on that. All right, anything else on the outline? Okay. Moving on to specific requests, Brian, do you want to come up and speak to or at least be available to answer people's.
So I know you guys wanted to spend money, so I'm giving you the opportunity. As you know, we have a new employee in my office, a few new employees up around actually, but, the town accountant also has a new assistant, so on a similar lines, you may be hearing from her, and you may or may not, I don't know.
I think we will, I think she made clear to me that we will.
So, the one little problem we have, especially smaller departments, is if we get a new employee during the year. We haven't budgeted for them, for their training or anything, so if any training comes about, we're out of luck. I realize right now we have our set training embedded in our budgets for all the departments, and it works fairly well. When things are just coming along, but for new employees, it's kind of a gap that we have. So, for instance, Emily was hired in November, and we have an opportunity through the Mass Municipal Human Resource Association for this 5-week long training, which seems really good. It's a certificate program. I think I put an overview in the packet for you just to quickly see what it's about. It's mostly HR and hiring, onboarding, benefits administration. So it's right up her alley for the most part. I think it'd be great for her to go. I just don't have the money. So, because we have tight budgets. So I came before the board. I feel this is like a legitimate request for use of funds from the personnel board, especially since she is an SAP person, of course, and with the outlook for the rest of the year, I think the board will certainly looks like you'll have some extra funds at the end of the year, so that's my request.
I'll just add that this is a brand new program.
Yes, brand new, yes.
It's does start in April. It is all virtual, so that makes it a little bit easier for the employee to.
Good point. I mean, this is, at least since I've been on the board, of first for us, where we're asked to fund training for a single individual, but I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I just, for
I
historical,
think we've done it in the past, have we?
A little bit further back.
Yes, okay.
comments, questions for Brian? Please.
I'm very supportive. If you think this is the right thing for your employee, I think we need to find a way to make it work. I don't know what bucket, I mean, that's the question, right, is what bucket it should come out of, right? Because I think based on the discussion we just had, I think we're gonna be able to spend, like, and I also know, right, like, you can't forecast the end of the year yet, right? Like, I know, for example, benefits isn't a line item that you as the town administration control, that sometimes is available for interdepartmental budget transfers. So
Right.
what my recommendation would be is that we make sure this employee gets into this training. We temporarily set it up against our budget, but ask Mark and Brian as the year goes along, if they feel like they're gonna have other line items that would be available for interdepartmental transfers, that they make this money available back to us to put on one or more additional training that benefit, more than one employee. I think that's the happy medium I'm willing to strike today.
Okay. And I think it would have to come out of employee development because it doesn't qualify as tuition reimbursement. Other comments?
I'm supportive of this training. I would just ask Mark and Vanessa to think through a way that Emily can share the knowledge with the rest of people on the team as a way of just sort of not necessarily a train the trainers situation, but a way to ensure that there's some consistency in sharing and an approach that when we do grant these types of requests, we also want to capture and be able to share that information with others on the team, if that's appropriate.
Any other, John?
I get confused very easily. What Brian's memo is, it was we know we're not gonna spend that $5,000 in tuition reimbursement this year. We know that already, right? And under this year's budget.
Right.
Yeah. So it was my understanding that we could spend that money somewhere else in the budget.
But it really doesn't matter at this point because we have all this money. If later on it determines, we decide we need that money, 5,000 in employee development, we can use it for that.
What's the cost of this?
875. 875.
You're a tool.
I like
All right, give me
that.
Yeah.
All right, I'll move that we support the request by the treasurer for the employee development training with the understanding that the treasurer and town administrator will continue to look for opportunities to fund this in other budgets throughout the year.
For a second,
Second.
further discussion? All in favor, Mr. Thorburn,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jones Johnson.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, that is approved.
Thank you.
Good luck to her.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to new business, job descriptions. So we have 11 job descriptions. First of all, any questions or discussion about the job description?
My only request is if there's anything on, it says assessors, but it's really Board of Health, such assessors, I want to abstain from all of that, given Chelsea's role with Board of Health. So either going first or last.
Well, I can separate the vote, so
Okay.
we'll do
Okay.
10 and then we'll do that one separately. But I just want, anyone have any questions or comments on any of those 11 job descriptions?
I have one.
Oh, sure. Please identify yourself.
Of course, Chelsea Malinowski, and I'm speaking as the Chair of the Board of Health. Your agenda does not list the business admin one position as being assessors and Board of Health, but in the packet, you have the addendum for the Board of Health. So I'm assuming that you're taking both up today. So I want to express to the board how disappointed I am that I've been reaching out to your chair since the end of October and have not received response of a request that the Board of Health has voted to have the Personnel Board consider for reclassification, the business admin one for the assessors and the health department. When Collins Center was here last spring, the addendum was not completed. We were not requested that until the beginning of the fall this year. And so my concern is that there's a perception that employees are not being treated equally and fairly. Whether that's true or not, I can't speak to it. I didn't follow the process as closely as I should have. But given that other positions have been reviewed after addendums were provided is concerning to me as a taxpayer and as an elected official. And I think the fact that I requested to be put on an agenda and was ignored by your chair is unacceptable.
First of all, it's completely inaccurate. We had numerous discussions. I explained the process to you that the only way we could reclassify the position was if there was a change in job duties. And if there were a change in job duties, we could consider a reclassification. But absent the change in job duties, there was nothing we could do. You never said to me, well, put it on the agenda.
I did ask you
No,
to.
you didn't.
I did.
You didn't. Absolutely.
I asked you when this would be put on a
And I
personnel board
said
agenda.
there had
So
to
you
be
did
a
not,
change.
but Barry, I told you that you didn't have all the information. You did not have
But I
an
said
addendum,
There has to be a change in the job duties. The format was irrelevant. I explained that.
but you didn't have anything in writing outside of the general job description.
But if that contained all of the information, that's what was graded. People.
How do
were
I know
given-
it was included, Barry? It wasn't in writing.
What do you mean? There was a job description that was reviewed.
The
by-
addendum was not reviewed by Collins.
Well, so are you saying there were duties in the addendum that were not in the job?
Yes,
Then those were things you had to tell me, that what we discussed.
Barry,
was-
your job descriptions are generic for every business admin 1 and 2, correct? So the addendum has to be different than the job
But
description.
in the process, in the Collins Center process, they sat down with individuals and went through the job descriptions with them.
But the job description doesn't include what's in the addendum.
But there were questionnaires sent out to every employee to list duties. Am I correct? They had the opportunity.
But I never, Barry, that information, I don't know what was in that information. I know as the Board of Health Chair, we were requested at the beginning of the fall to provide an addendum, which had never been documented before,
Okay,
correct?
everyone in the town was requested to provide an addendum because we were changing format. We were not changing classifications, we were changing
But
format
how do you know that this job is classified correctly?
because we have the Collins Center evaluated
But they
it.
didn't have the addendum.
They sat down, they had questionnaires, they sat down with people and asked them.
So my point, Barry, is that the perception from the Board of Health as well as employees is that people are not being heard. And so I'm requesting that you table the Board of Health Business Admin 1 and have it reviewed with the addendum included. I'm not asking you to reclassify it. I'm asking you
But
to
everyone
reconsider.
could say, everyone
They
now
should.
has an addendum, but
They
they didn't
should.
have before. But it's a format change, it's not a content of the job change. That's all it is.
But the information, how do I know that information in the addendum was reviewed by Collins Center? I have no assurances that that was done.
Well, I didn't sit in on every meeting with everybody.
Neither
but
did I.
we
I wasn't
see
even
these
asked
people,
to.
This is what they do.
I think this is showing flaws in the process. You need to have all the documentation provided prior to doing an evaluation with Collins Center.
But you understand, the only reason they're addendums is because we decided that we wanted the same format for all job descriptions.
Yes,
So part of the reformatting was not to change the content, not to change the grade, just to change the format of the job descriptions.
but I have no assurances that you reviewed the information in the addendum to make sure it's
Anyone
graded.
have that in any job description when we're changing the format. How
But you
does-
did more than change the format. You
No, we
added
didn't.
content to the addendum.
all of that information was reviewed by the Collins Center when they
Prove it to me.
called the Collins
Fine.
Center. I mean,
Can you give me the information, please? To contact
We'll
Collins
get that
Center?
through Melanie. I was
Thank you.
not involved in that.
Okay, I'm frustrated because I feel like employees are not being heard, and it's my job as the chair of the Board of Health to express that to you, and I would have appreciated knowing that it was on the agenda today. I happened to come across it, and it doesn't even include the Board of Health on the agenda. So I really think you need to look at your process, because I think it's flawed, and maybe it's not, but the perception is that you're not hearing everybody else. Thank you.
I would just say that we not only did the original interviews, we had them go back and do others where there were any questions. They sat down with the employees. They got all of the information. So I'm comfortable that, now, at the end of the day, I'm also aware that not everybody's gonna be happy with where they ended up. That's the nature of the beast. But I just, I can't put something on the agenda if it's just, I can't reclassify something unless there's new information. And if there's not new information, then there's really nothing we can do. All right, so we will take. Okay.
Everything.
Yeah. Can we do this?
There are two addenda.
Okay.
Tied to that.
All right. Any further discussion about, we're gonna remove 5A2 from the agenda. Any further discussion about job descriptions 1 and 3 through 11?
Is there just any confirmation that there have been no, because I know we had, in the first time when we were dealing with the town administrator job descriptions, we had the old ones, which I know caused confusion, especially on my part. I just want to make sure that there's been some check at Mark's level or the department head level that stuff wasn't slid in here that would cause like a major change in any of these job descriptions. When I read through them, they made sense, but again, that is a
Right.
downfall of the process for undertaking was there something kind of that slid in there? But if it did, I just want to be aware of it so that we can consider that obviously
Right.
moving forward.
Melanie was reviewing everything as it came out, but there weren't content changes with the format.
All right, I'm satisfied then.
Okay. I'll then move that we approve I'll just read them. The following job descriptions: Deputy Assessor, Business Administrator 2 in the Facility Department, Library Associate, Library Page, Library Director, Assistant Library Director, Youth Services Librarian, Library Supervisor, Library Assistant, Library Technician. Is there a second?
Second,
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, Mr. Thorburn?
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski?
aye.
Ms. Jones Johnson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Those are approved. Moving on to item 5B, employee retention. This is flows from the discussion that we had at our last meeting on what steps other towns are doing to retain employees. And so you see in the packet, not in the packet, you received it yesterday, I guess, the memo from Vanessa going through what at least some other towns are doing in this regard.
So this is just some examples from some other communities we've spoken to in the last few weeks. Some of them are on the community community. They did have good ideas, and it's in addition, some of these comments may also apply to union employees, not just non-union staff. a lot of them tie back to employee recognition, some monetary, some, not without any monetary adjustment. Some tied to classifications, other benefits that communities have used to retain employees.
And I'll just,
Additional personal days, if you don't use any sick time, you could be awarded several more personal days, which of course don't carry over. But it is additional paid leave, every year for, employees in some cases in those communities. Other communities have now started, covering paid parental leave outside of FMLA, which, would apply to employees as well. So I present that for your, not paid parental leave, but the suggestions in general.
but just for historical record purposes, we have tried, or when I say we, I mean the board, well, before I was on the board, have looked at ways to reward employees. There was a study group, I want to say, of employees that were on merit pay for, and essentially came up, nothing that was workable. We tried to get at it through performance evaluation, and we're completely unsuccessful in that. So I think we have to continue to think of ways that we can, what things we can do to make sure that we keep particularly our best employees, but all employees. So anyway, these are some ideas or ways that other towns are dealing with it. So I would throw it open for discussion, thoughts that people have.
Well, first, I appreciate you acting on the motion. I wish we had more responses, but I realize this is what you normally get. I think a simple thank you goes a long way, but sometimes it's not enough. So I think we do need to find ways, and it doesn't require the SAP and the bylaw and anything like that. We need to find ways to recognize employees on a more regular basis, even if it doesn't include monetary.
Right.
Because I think naturally, right, that ends up on public agendas, and it's a nice reward, I think, to them to understand what they've done. Now, we don't need to go overboard either, right? Because there is if you do too much of that, then it dilutes, the special recognition you're doing. I was intrigued by the Easton documentation that was provided to us. And I think, and I don't know, I realize we're up against the clock here, in particular for spring town meeting. But I think that this whole, I'm a huge proponent of the grid, as everyone knows, right? And I think we're doing a great thing for employees by implementing that, even if they're on the lower step of that grid. And I realize that, right, the optics of being a step 1, step 2, isn't always like, as opposed to being like step 10 or step, in a lot of it matters when they were hired, how long they've been with the town, et cetera. I would think our easiest path forward is revisiting longevity stipends in the short term. And again, this comes back to the budget. I don't know what the budget can and can't, but I think, what we're finding, right, is those with the longer tenures in town find that they're in a different spot, right, than those that got hired maybe in the last 5-ish years, right, where obviously employment conditions change both municipally and candidly in the private sector as well. So I would like to request that Mark and the team think about whether longevity stipends are the right amount, to move forward, whether that's a this year or a next year thing, because I realize it has budgetary impact, and but I think that's one thing I would be open to looking at between now and town meeting. And then I think longer term, we need to think about how, like, if an employee, right, and it kind of goes back to what my language I introduced earlier, but it's slightly different, is in some positions, right, the market might be outpacing our 4-year process, right? So pick any position, right? And if there's a compelling argument that can be said that our comparable communities are compensating at such a differential for that basically same job description. I realize no job description is ever going to be apples to apples. Always going to be differences of how Southborough does something versus Westborough or Hopkinton or any of our comparable communities. But I do think we need to have a mechanism to revisit the steps in between the 4 years. I'm not willing to do that right now because I realize the steps alone are a big, no pun intended, step forward here, but I think that's what has to be our focus once we get beyond town meeting of what process should be there if there's compelling evidence that the same position in another community is just so outpaced of that. I also, not to have another special article at town meeting, I also go back to some of my comments I made at the last town meeting is I do think there needs to be some sort of retention tool available to the town administrator in rare circumstances, right? Like if someone's going to take a 2-step promotion in another community, we're not gonna match that. We can't, right? But if someone's going to take the exact same position in another town, the only reason they're leaving is because of the financial, right? The financial impact they're gonna have, then there needs to be some mechanism to deal with that. Again, it's a very loaded question. I realize it opens us, personnel board, and the personnel director up to that. But those are the things that I think we need to keep looking at. And I think we keep discussing and you know, there's employees in the room, there's employees on Zoom, they have ideas, like I'm all ears, right? Like I wanna make this right. It's not perfect. I was that, but unfortunately, it's the downfall of working in municipal structure at times, right? It's the lack of ability to deal with some of these things, but I do think we have some tools for immediate short-term recognition, but also longer term to encourage long tenured employees.
Yeah, and I think we did have some discussion and we talked about implementation of the grid about what if anything we should be doing for longer term employees, and we never sort of came to a resolution on that. On the stipend, was your thought of a one-time payment or something?
On longevity, it would be permanent until it's revisited by a future personnel board. But on you're saying my little special article suggestion, or?
Just really, you mentioned a stipend, and I'm just wondering, are you thinking that it would get a set amount extra per year? Or how would that, and understanding we're just having a general.
Yeah. So I think the first part is to deal with the longevity, because that's the easiest way to make it fair across the board. And you look at the bands, like just like we did with vacation, right? Like I think we're now on the more favorable side of vacation, right, from the comparable communities, especially once we institute the change that we're gonna do this year with, you know, narrowing the gap for those people that come in with the 3-year window. So I think longevity is part of it. That would be in perpetuity, right, until future personnel board or town meeting. I think the potential special article would be in the moment, sort of, what do I need to do to get to the next review process or reclassification process so that the employee doesn't walk out the door. The third piece of this is, I think, that ability to move, like someone had, I forget which community had, I saw my screen, but like the double step process, like creating a mechanism, like if someone's gonna leave for $2 more an hour in the same position in another community, how do we close that gap? But that would have to be something that's permanent, right? Like giving them a couple $1,000 only deals with that for that year. It doesn't deal with it for each successive year. So I think there's two that look into perpetuity, one easier to implement than other. The other is really, I'll call it a stopgap measure. And if you actually look at it from an pure economics perspective, we have to pay that person out for vacation, right? My favorite topic, right? The payout for vacation when they leave is gonna be more than anything you're gonna actually have to do to fix your situation. True. In most instances, so. Again, I think if you start soliciting for further feedback from the employees of what they're hearing, they all have peers in other communities. I think that would be helpful. Again, we're not gonna deal with the double promotion, that someone's just, was working probably in a lower position in Southborough than they were capable and got a job elsewhere. We're not gonna ever fix that. But what I am looking to do is like a lateral movement of some sort.
So the SAP now, as we discussed last week, has the provision that requires exceptional circumstances. So we have the ability to do it, but there have to be exceptional circumstances. And is it a matter of either changing the standard so that one can argue that we're about to lose an employee. That's exceptional circumstances and we can deal with it. But is that the question? So I guess my point is, we might have the language in the SAP to do it now, but does it give us enough flexibility to do it? I guess is the question I have in my mind. John?
I would like to suggest that, I think your longevity, and I was just looking at the longevity scale, is way out of whack. Want to pay $500 to somebody who's been here 40 years. That's, and, I think we ought to going ahead with this SAP for this year. We ought to take a look at that longevity schedule and bring it up.
Well, and that's why I want Mark to look at it, because there's just longevity stipends in union contracts too, so I need to make sure that he's comfortable with both budget wise and, making sure,
We'll say that we reviewed the longevity schedule maybe 5 years ago, and we were on a high end. It is very easy for us to go out and do that, again, in the next 2 days and report on February.
I focus on total compensation, right? And you also have to think about any department you've lost someone in this year, whether it be due to retirement or leaving. What was the cost of that transition? Tens of thousands, I would imagine, in every single one of those departments, right? Regardless of whether it was the department head or a business coordinator or an administrative assistant, right? Like all levels, right? So I think you need to look at the total pay package. If I were an employee, and if employees think differently, I focus on what the total dollar amount I'm bringing home, right? That I'm guaranteed to bring home every year.
Yeah.
I don't care what you call it, as long as I get to a number, right? That, right, like these folks have in their head. I don't know what that number is, right? So even if our longevity schedule is better than other towns, maybe our step schedule, right? Because we have to acknowledge our step schedule, we were way behind, right? And I think the personnel board has done everything we can to try to right that ship for the 10 years where we didn't have steps. But we have a period of 10 years where we had employees that were only moving 2 to 3% or 4% a year, sometimes, right, not even that, because they weren't getting recognized tenure. That's the population I'm targeting with this discussion. Obviously, if someone just started 2 years ago and they're just using this as a stepping stone, like that, we're again not going to be able to deal with. I'm dealing with that population that wants to stay in Southborough, but is seeing these opportunities elsewhere, and it's like, I can't ignore this. My family, my financial, stability, etc.
Mark?
So, yeah, I'm not gonna prolong the conversation, but just 2 points. One, to Jason's comment. I think, we have a smaller staff here than a lot of towns do. So we really don't have any, I'll call them learning positions, or positions where you can incrementally, catch up to what you need to know. So we've had to hire into a lot of these positions, people who are fully trained, fully ready to go. So any expenses that we would have had for training some of these people are built into these salaries that we're offering. And because these people are hard to find, we're paying more than you may in a better hiring climate. The only other thing I will offer, and I appreciate the comments that have been made The one thing I did find interesting was in Easton, it isn't a collective bargaining agreement, but that market adjustment provision, which would address a lot of these issues that you're talking about, instead of just saying, okay, double steps or this or this or this. You could do something like that, which would help to give you this flexibility that I think we talked about at the last meeting. So, and this isn't an now discussion. I don't think this is something you can pull together, in 2 meetings. This is something I think that you begin to work on after town meeting. This is a summer project. To put some language together, put something together like this. I think that that's probably the better way to go in the long term. I agree with Vanessa, we were on the higher end last time we took a look at longevity. I agree with the total compensation. We do talk a little bit about, basically the whole package when it comes to employees, whether it's the money, the quality of life based on hours, based on proximity, all of those things. And Vanessa does a nice job putting together the whole package. But I agree, I'd rather be looking at a bottom line rather than saying, okay, so here's the salary, here's longevity after so many years, here's this, and everything stuff.
But are you open to looking, I agree, we can't do it, we can't try to rush this for spring town meeting. I hope there's a fall town meeting that we can maybe slide that market rate adjustment into. But can you look at the longevity between now and then to see if there's, right, and maybe we have to sweeten it for 1 year, right? And then if we get things right sized, then,
It's always hard to take it away.
I understand, I've done the math a few different ways. It's penny wise and pound foolish not to at least analyze it and I think effectuate and.
It is, I think it's a short-term gap approach to any, if you want to even call it retention, right? It's, I think, something more like a market adjustment, something like that is more of a sustainable approach. But, yes, something in the short term to do something.
I think the intent would go a long way, even if it doesn't fully solve someone's gap.
I think if you set it up like that, not that here's what we're doing, and now we're gonna move on. Tell the story, right? This is what we're looking to do. We can't get there now. We'll look to do this in the short term to address the problem now or partially address the issue now with the thought that we're gonna move forward with this, over the next, 8 to 10 months.
Mary, there's one other area I wanted to put out that, we're pretty concerned about. We've had a couple of situations this year where an employee in the SAP was filling in for someone else who was out in their office, or, there was a vacancy. They were doing, really, 2 jobs at once, those kinds of situations. And we have no ability in the SAP to recognize that in a monetary way. We do for department head. But not if it's at a non-department head level. And that was the case in a couple of times. So, I want to throw that out that that's another area we'd like to look at. When someone is filling in and doing a lot more than their own job, is there a way to recognize that?
I think one of these towns had a double duty provision.
Yes.
I think you should look at that.
Yeah,
And that's
that's
an
exactly
easier item short term than long term.
Okay, so to be continued.
But we're clear on the action. Mark, Vanessa, the team are gonna look at budgetary and related to longevity and bring back a proposed schedule to our next.
Okay, any other discussion on employee retention?
No, not necessarily on retention. I guess what I'd like to have a sense of, at each meeting, we have a long list of things that we ask Vanessa and Mark to look into and come back with, but I don't have a clear sense of a comprehensive list of understanding all of those actions and the timing on which we would hope or expect to see them come back. They're not the biggest team out there, so I just wanted to, I guess, address this notion of, I feel like sometimes we're trying to boil the ocean, and I want to make sure that as we're thinking about all of these actions, understanding what is the priority and what is the timing. And Mark and Vanessa, I don't know if you have a running list of all these things that you capture all of the requests from the
We generally do it from, the draft meeting minutes and notes that we're both taking.
Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to gauge what's priority. Like, what's the most critical thing that we need to be focused on and coming back for approvals or actions versus things that will be more long-term if we, take a little bit longer to do the analysis and the research, we can come up with a really robust and comprehensive a program or action. So that's all. That's
Okay,
just,
and
those are my
good point.
comments.
And maybe we should ask Vanessa and Mark, when should we expect to hear from you on what we just asked you to do? It's a reasonable time frame for you.
When's your next meeting?
February 14th.
I think getting a review in terms of longevity and getting an understanding as to where we rank in terms of comparable communities. I think that's pretty straightforward. We have that for the next week.
Okay.
I mean, at the end of the day, Mark's the personnel director, right? He should be able to prioritize what is a gating issue, right? And I think anytime you have to sit through a recruitment process, how long does that take you, right? In your team versus going and getting some data. I think any to-dos, right? And maybe we just need, to Michelle's point, like a running to-do list. I think it's helpful just to get an update on them, right? And then the personnel board can weigh in if we think it's not moving fast enough, and Mark and his team can realign us if we don't. But I think it's helpful to capture the actions from either motions or discussions. And, we may deprioritize things like we just did, saying this is clearly not gonna happen before town meeting. And we may move things up and say we need to do something, with a limited scope. Because town meeting unfortunately governs a lot of our time. Right, wrong, or indifferent.
Right now, yeah.
Okay. All right. Is there any other business? John?
Just a question, I was late to the meeting, did the December 13th should get approved without any?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, see no other business. Is there any public comment? Yes. Katie?
Okay, I'm Katie Berry, Business Administrator 1 with the Select Board and Town Administrator's Office, and I'm a resident. So I just want to say that I'm really happy to hear about the discussions that happened today. I feel that for me, the meeting that happened last month was very unsettling as an employee and even more so as a taxpayer. So I'd like to commend Mr. Malinowski for bringing that up, addressing it, and coming with a solution. I appreciate that. I also want to talk about Ms. Malinowski's comment and say that though you might not understand if the Collins Center had all the information, I went through it, and I will say that I feel that I am in the same boat as Barbara. My process was, for lack of a better word, I feel like my first job prior to me was secretary. And then I came into a hybrid role where I'm doing 2 roles at once. I had to ask for an interview. I was doing the zoning job as well, so it's on me that I didn't pay attention close enough. I was pretty busy feeling that this was gonna go right, was excited about it. But I had asked to get interviewed, even though my job was completely different from what it was prior. And when I sat down, the discussion was wonderful because the woman was wonderful, but it was like, oh yeah, obviously you're a BA1. And then I left thinking that that was great. When I was asked to update my job description, it was the same description that was sent to the Collins Center. It was not looked at, even though it was a completely different role. And everything that I had put in my addendum was from the survey that was given me from the Collins Center. So I do think that that's why you're seeing people coming forward, because to me, I was shocked that that was the process, because I feel like my job description was not looked at in the correct capacity. So I just wanted to make that clear and support and thank Chelsea for bringing that up, because it empowered me to speak today as well. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, let's move on to board calendar. We have a meeting on the 14th. You know, we schedule the March meeting. Would normally be, I think, on the 13th. Does that work for people?
Yes.
Michelle, is that good for you?
Yeah, I thought we already had it on the 13th. Is that what, for March?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're typically the second Wednesday in the month, so.
Yes.
All right. Well, March 13th it is. At this point, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
John,
What did you schedule for March
13th.
13th? Okay.
Okay, there is a motion, there is a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, Mr. Thorburn,
Yeah.
Mr. Malinowski, Ms. Jones Johnson,
Aye.
chair votes aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.